Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving headfirst into a really fascinating philosophical question today. Why in the world might deliberately suspending our judgment actually be our absolute best cognitive tool in a society that never stops moving? We'll be unpacking a framework known as reflective humanism and zeroing in on this concept of deferred judgment. And look, we aren't talking about indecision here. We're talking about a highly deliberate strategy to keep our minds flexible and open to whatever the future holds. So settle in, get comfortable, and let's jump right in. So we live in an era that constantly demands immediate opinions, right? It feels like everywhere you look, there's pressure to instantly know where you stand. But we really have to stop and ask ourselves, does this rush actually serve our long-term understanding? The source material we're looking at completely challenges one of the biggest assumptions of our modern world, this idea that the faster you can process some new input and spit out a stance, the smarter you are. But honestly, when we prioritize speed over absolutely everything else, what are we sacrificing in the process? Just think about the rigid binaries we face every single day. Look at your social media feeds, or the relentless news cycle, or even just regular workplace dynamics. You are constantly being bombarded with these demands. Are you right or wrong? Do you support or oppose? Like or dislike? Believe or doubt? We are essentially being trained to treat every single piece of incredibly complex information like it's a multiple-choice question that needs a split-second answer. But as we all know, reality almost never fits neatly into those little checkboxes. So what happens when the facts on the ground inevitably shift? Because they always do. Our sources introduce this incredibly compelling concept called transparent pain. When new information comes to light over time, a prematurely fixed opinion basically locks our cognition entirely into place. Because our internal processing has gotten rigid, while the external world is still out there being chaotic and constantly changing, those two forces collide. This friction, this deep resistance to updating a worldview you've already finalized, creates this invisible, transparent pain. And this dynamic reveals two totally diverging paths for our minds. One path is basically the trap of immediate closure. You observe something, you instantly judge it, and because you've staked a claim, you fall right into defensive commitment. That makes it incredibly painful to update your views later on. But the alternate path? That's about openness. You observe, but then you consciously hit the brakes and suspend judgment. Doing that allows for additional observation, mental reorganization, and finally, a much, much more informed conclusion. The key difference here isn't about speed. It's entirely about your openness to revision. What this really proves is that suspension isn't just passive indecision. It is a highly active, structured process. Think of it as a form of cognitive engineering. You have your observation, your suspension, additional observation, and then reorganization. It takes deliberate, conscious effort to hold off on jumping straight to that final judgment line. By sitting comfortably in that suspension phase, you aren't running away from an answer. You're literally holding the space open so your understanding can actually mature. Now, this brings us to a foundational concept from our reading known as reconnectability. You can kind of think of it as your mind's internal infrastructure, or like your mental bandwidth. By deferring judgment, you preserve spare capacity. It's this vital inner buffer. If you burn through all your cognitive energy just locking in an instant opinion right out of the gate, you literally have nothing left in the tank to process tomorrow's evidence. Reconnectability ensures that you can safely absorb new, unexpected experiences without your entire worldview just collapsing in on itself. We absolutely need to reframe how we view this behavior. Holding off on a conclusion is not a lack of conviction, and it is definitely not a weakness. It is a deliberate design philosophy to keep our perception gracefully open to the world around us. In a society that is constantly screaming at you to pick a side right now, choosing to step back and say, you know what, I am still observing, is actually a deeply powerful stance. It acts like a shield, protecting your mind from all the fleeting noise of the moment. Our sources outline two really profound ways that we generate meaning in our lives. The first is discontinuous generation, which happens when we hold on to these fixed judgments. Reality is eventually going to force an update, but when it does, it comes as a jarring, super painful collision. On the flip side, we have continuous generation, which totally minimizes that friction. By just holding a question open, your updates happen smoothly and quietly. It's like tuning a dial to match the changing world, completely avoiding the heavy, painful rebound of being quote-unquote proven wrong. And all of this ties directly into the broader philosophy of reflective humanism. This approach suggests that truth really shouldn't be treated as a fixed, stagnant dot on a map, like just pointing at something and declaring it forever good or forever bad. Instead, it treats human cognition as directional vectors and gradients. It prioritizes the orbit around an idea way more than a static conclusion. It's really all about maintaining our trajectory and fine-tuning our perception as we continuously move through life. When we intentionally cultivate that inner margin, that spare capacity we talked about earlier, something really fascinating happens. First off, we prevent ourselves from just falling into automatic, default knee-jerk reactions. Different memories and fresh observations are actually given the breathing room they need to naturally converge. And interestingly enough, our sources note that building this extra capacity actually raises our threshold for creativity. It gives us the cognitive freedom to synthesize entirely new concepts from scratch. Look, fast decisions are obviously heavily rewarded in our high-speed societies. We get that. But true long-term adaptability relies entirely on this quiet, incredible ability, the power to gracefully overwrite your own worldview without putting up a wall of defensive resistance. If your entire identity is tied up in your initial snap judgments, overwriting them is going to feel like a massive personal threat. But if your identity is rooted in your capacity to observe and update, well, then you become incredibly resilient.
Consider this thought for a second. Truth is an ongoing orbit of overlapping information. A person who can gracefully update their worldview is absolutely not just some blank slate wandering around without any opinions. Rather, they are someone who fundamentally refuses to lose their capacity to evolve. They understand that real meaning is generated in the continuous, messy overlapping of brand new observations mixing with past understanding.
Let's wrap things up today with this quiet reflection because it really challenges our modern definition of intelligence. We have built all these systems that essentially test how incredibly fast we can spit out an answer. But what if real wisdom lies in the exact opposite direction? Moving forward, ask yourself, should intelligence really be measured by how quickly we reach conclusions or by how carefully we preserve the possibility of changing them when the facts change? Let's try to leave a little bit of space for the world to reveal something totally new to us today. Thanks for tuning in to this explainer.